Great. I'm going to get started. So, hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Rabbi Melanie Lavav. I am so glad to see so many of you here with us live tonight, and I know we'll have a larger number of people watching the recording. We are in for a treat tonight with our special friend and teacher, Dr. Lesley Simpson. Before I get a chance to introduce Lesley, I want to welcome you all. Some of you are new to Shomer Collective, tell you a little bit about our work and what we can expect together tonight. So, by way of background, my name is Melanie Lavav. I am a second career rabbi. I'm a social worker, a board certified chaplain, and end of life doula. And I serve as the executive director of Shomer Collective. Shomer Collective is a nonprofit startup started by a group of friends who had had the experience of someone close to them dying, and they didn't know what to do or where to turn Jewishly. I imagine hearing that is not a surprise to many of you who may have had a similar experience. And I give you a lot of credit for coming tonight to begin or continue the work of confronting mortality Jewishly in order to live lives of greater meaning and connection, so that when the time comes, we've had the conversations that we need to have. You may see our tagline, talking about death or talk about death Jewishly. What does that mean? We do a lot of education and training for professionals. Some of you here tonight are professionals looking to beef up your skills on how to help more people benefit from what Jewish wisdom has to offer in talking about end of life and planning for end of life. And we do programs like we're doing tonight, direct and open to the public here online. And we do that in person in communities as well. If you're in a community where you want to see more of Shomer's work happening, feel free to invite us. You can reach out to us at hello@shomercollective.org, and we're happy to come deliver our teaching and work in person. And before we get started in earnest, I just want to do a little bit of grounding in some Jewish wisdom, where we are on the Jewish calendar. Some of you have heard me say this many times, when things are speeding up beyond my ability to keep track of them, and the world feels like it continues to spin out of control in so many ways. One of the ways I find helpful to ground myself is to take a look at the Jewish calendar and where we are in space and time Jewishly. So, where we are in space and time Jewishly tonight is in the month of Elul on the Hebrew calendar, approaching the new year, Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, in just a couple of weeks. And on the Jewish calendar, Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, is known by a number of names. In rabbinic tradition, one of the names for the new year is Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembering. Now, some of you may recognize this phrase, Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembering, as today's modern Memorial Day in Israel, when we remember those who were killed in war and by acts of terror in Israel. That's the modern Yom HaZikaron. But the ancient Yom HaZikaron is a day of remembering. Why is Rosh Hashanah called a day of remembering? Part of the Rosh Hashanah liturgy, the prayer language that's recited traditionally, is a section called Zichronot, or remembrances, in which we plead to be remembered for good this year. Now, I was thinking about that, right? For those of you who believe in God, we're pleading with God that we should be written in the book of life, proverbially, and for some of us, literally. And we know that none of us is perfect, and some of us may have missed the mark in a number of ways over the last year, but we're asking for the year ahead to be written for life, to be remembered for life. In this month before Rosh Hashanah, it is traditional to do an inventory of the soul, a taking of account of who we've been, how we've acted in the last year, as we prepare for who we want to be and how we want to act in the year ahead. And in thinking about asking God to be remembering us for good, it reminded me of this idea of selective memory. Like, we only want to be remembered for the good things that we do. And I thought a lot about how that's connected to what we choose to put into our ethical wills. Some of us may choose to include ways that we thought we missed the mark in our own lives, while some of us may focus on the positives in our lives for generations to be able to focus on that in the years to come. So it is traditional for us to dedicate our learning in memory of someone. I want to invite you to think about the next time you join Shomer Collective, sponsoring future programs in memory of your loved ones. We welcome you to be in touch with us. hello@shomercollective.org. So now we are blessed to welcome Dr. Lesley Simpson here as our teacher and our guide tonight, who will set the stage for how we're going to engage with her teaching tonight. All yours, Lesley.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here with the Shomer Collective, and I'm going to plunge right in. We're here to learn about, I call these letters wisdom letters. I tend not to call them ethical wills because if there are any lawyers in the room, they're not legal documents. They have no legal power. They are not binding, but the power of them really resides in the voice of the person who took time to write something down. So we're going to get an introduction to the repository of this material, but really the deeper purpose tonight of our gathering is for all of you to figure out what wisdom you'd like to share from your own life. And so in the second half of the presentation, I'm going to give you some writing prompts. And my promise to you tonight is that if you do the prompts, you're going to leave with rough material. You can revise it. You can make up your own prompts if you want. The prompts are my gift to you. And you're going to have rough material that you can then craft your own letter. We're going to go to the next slide. So just a bit about who I am. I worked most of my life for Canadian daily newspapers as a journalist, and I found myself increasingly curious about Jewish subjects. And now this is going to sound very corny, but it's the truth. One day I read a book, and the book was called, here it is, So That Your Values Live On, Ethical Wills and How to Prepare Them. And I felt as if I was Alice in Wonderland. I read that this book is a collection of letters, chronologically organized. It includes letters from rabbis. It includes letters from the Holocaust, from the State of Israel. It has a collection of contemporary, primarily American letters, as well as some fiction. And I felt like I was at a dinner party with people I was never going to meet and I didn't know, but they were all together and they were sharing what had most mattered in their lives, what had given them joy, how they had coped with catastrophe. I'm somebody that is not like a huge fan of small talk. And I thought, this is an extraordinary tradition, and why don't I know more about it? So I had a very bad case of curiosity. I did a PhD about these letters. And when I finished, I decided I didn't really want to write an academic book. I really wanted to share the letters. They're not well known in the diaspora. And so I founded L'Chaim, the Jewish Letters Project. You're all invited to subscribe at no fee. And I publish twice a month. My goal, my dream is really one day to publish a collection of letters from Jews from all over the world whose voices we haven't heard from yet. We'll go to the next slide. And before we get going, just some basics for those who've never heard of this tradition: the what, the why, and the when. So the ethical will it's a letter. I call it a wisdom letter, but it's more about precept than property. So this is not a letter about your material assets. You go to a lawyer for that. This is really an act of values clarification, and it's something Melanie Lvov talked about in the L'Chaim, the Jewish Letters post that we published yesterday, and how it relates to the Shomer Collective. I recommend reading it. Why do these letters matter? Well, I see there's some people in the chat who are dealing with grieving. Someone has a grief podcast and other people who are working on loss. So these letters matter because someone has taken the time to write down their own wisdom in their own words, and nobody is speaking on your behalf. That is one of the really powerful things about this tradition. And the other question is, well, when would someone do this? There's usually some kind of rite of passage. It could be something sweet. Like I teach courses in how to write these, and in one of my classes, I had a grandmother, and she wanted to write a letter for her granddaughter on the occasion of her becoming bat mitzvah. Um, Other letters on the upcoming birth of a grandchild, a marriage, an adoption. The rite of passage could also be something sorrowful. It could be learning of a terminal diagnosis, some other form of loss. And there's a letter I have from a woman who wrote um, her letter after her husband died and a fire destroyed her business in Canada. So they're centered around rites of passage, and they could also be bittersweet, neither fully sweet nor fully sorrowful. And what I'd like you to do tonight is, if you listen to the voices that we have, you'll hear on the next slide, um, there's a great variety of material, um, variety of tone and nuance, and no one is speaking on your behalf. Um, this, for people who are wondering, like, well, where did this idea come from? And Rabbi Levav talked about the month of Elul and this idea of remembering. So in the Torah, the Israelites are always being commanded to remember. Remember the covenant, the exodus from Egypt, Shabbat, Amalek. And the wisdom letters for us, they constitute a form of remembering for us. So this is not just for rabbis. This is for anyone who wants to share their life experience. There's an American writer named Sharon Strassfeld. She's on the next slide. Her name might be familiar to you. And what happened to her was she had a daughter named Kayla. The daughter was leaving for university. And the mom figured, well, she's probably not going to come back. She wanted to give her daughter something, but she didn't really know what to give her. And this book opens with Sharon Strassfeld telling a story about when her daughter was younger. The mother went to considerable effort to try to find the perfect piece of jewelry for her daughter. And her daughter was very polite and thanked her for the jewelry, but she never wore it. So years later, when she was leaving for university, the mom felt she hadn't shared enough of her personal history and her life wisdom, and she started writing a letter. The rite of passage was the daughter leaving for university. So something that's kind of bittersweet for people here in this room that have gone through that experience. You'll know what that's about. And for Sharon Strassfeld, because she had more than one child, the letter ended up turning into a book. It's called Everything I Know: Basic Life Rules from a Jewish Mother. Sometimes people ask me if I have a favorite letter, and I have to say, this is one of my favorites. Shalom Aleichem was the pen name of the great Yiddish comic writer Solomon Rabinovich. When he died, his entire ethical will or wisdom letter was reprinted in the New York Times. There's a full page. And the reason why he's a favorite for me is I argue that he really revolutionized this genre. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look in the historical rearview mirror and you want to see, well, what were people writing like before the French Revolution? This is a tradition that has a history. Those ethical wills tend to be what I call fairly bossy pants, top-down directives. And what Solomon Rabinovich did was he completely reimagined what we call Jewish memory in the form of comedy as a weapon against despair. Now, what exactly did he do? He asked his family members to get together once a year on his yurt site and read the stories that made them laugh out loud. The remarkable thing is, for more than 100 years, his descendants have actually done this. And fortunately for them, he's very funny and the humor stands up. It's highly verbal. And he left it up to them to decide what was going to make them laugh out loud. You'll know yourselves, like laughing out loud is a hard test. We can go to the next slide and you'll see there's just a picture of the New York Times, how they reprinted his letter the day of his funeral. And he said, select one of my stories, one of the really joyous ones, and read it aloud, and let my name be mentioned by them with laughter rather than not be mentioned at all. He gave his family members a choice. They could gather to say Kaddish, the traditional memorial prayer, or they could gather and read his material. If his work is not familiar to you, and you need a laugh, as we all need a laugh these days, I recommend going to the website devoted to his work, shalomaleichem.org. And it's fabulous because there are recordings in Yiddish and in English of his work, and you can hear the humor, and there's a real pleasure in hearing it read out loud. I mentioned at the beginning that there was a woman who wrote a letter after her husband died and after her business had burned down in Canada. And that woman was Rachel Wolf. So Shalom Aleichem died in 1916. And a few years later, a few miles north, there was a woman named Rachel Wolf. Rachel Wolf was not a household name. She wasn't a professional writer. She wasn't a public figure in any way. But I link her and I elevate her here because she and Solomon Rabinovich illuminate something really fundamental about Jewish memory. So in his letter, in his wisdom letter, Solomon Rabinovich said, "Don't waste your money on foolish monuments. The best monument would be for my work to be read." And Rachel Wolf says, the example of 11 children, of one father and mother standing together in love and faithfulness, will be a more beautiful adornment to the memory of your dear parents than the most costly monument. And I chose these because I think they illuminate something fundamental about Jewish memory. Christian societies are famous for magnificent cathedrals, and Jewish civilizations are masters of architectures in time. And these letters are linked to Jewish time. I chose them because they're both pointing to what Rabinovich called the foolishness of the physical monument. He wanted to be remembered in a different way. Some people say, well, like, what makes these letters Jewish? One of the really fun things about these letters is there is a love and a riffing with Jewish text. If anybody is interested in this, I recommend Rabbi Shai Held's book called Judaism is About Love. He really illuminates this love of textual conversation. For anyone here who's ever spent time with Sefaria or gone to Torah study, you'll have had that experience of time travel where you have a text and then you have rabbis in different centuries and countries who are debating and interpreting the text in different ways. And some of the wisdom letters that we have contain this riff, this play, this conversation. And the one that's coming up has a special relationship with the Shomer Collective, and it features a famous phrase from Deuteronomy, and it's tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Now, Tzedek Tzedek Tirdoff was in a letter from a woman named Phyllis Finger. Unsurprisingly, Phyllis Finger was a lawyer who worked in Texas. And I want to read her letter to you, but I really also want to share the backstory of how I came to have this letter in the first place and how grateful I am to the Shomer Collective because I never would have known about it otherwise. So in 2023, I was teaching for the Shomer Collective just the way I'm teaching now, and it was online. And on the Zoom, there was a man named Dave Finger, and he popped into the chat. And he said his wife, Phyllis, had died the previous year, and she had written one of these letters. I'm so grateful, first of all, to Phyllis Finger for writing the letter and to the late Dave Finger for his generosity. Today, I pulled up the email that Dave Finger wrote to me after the Shomer meeting, and I wanted to read it to you because this material is really about honoring people's voices. So I want to honor the late Dave Finger. This is what he wrote to me the day after the presentation. I mentioned in the chat last night that my late wife, who passed away last July, had written her ethical will 30 years ago. At the time, she was a practicing attorney, and her law practice was struggling. I was unemployed and looking for a job, and we had recently moved back into our house after it had burned down the previous year, and we had been displaced while it was being rebuilt. In short, it was a very stressful time for us. A few weeks ago, I found my wife's ethical will in a locked desk drawer in our study. It was a drawer where we kept important documents such as passports, birth certificates. I was searching for another document and came across a sealed envelope that said Finger and Daniel, the name of her law firm. I hadn't seen stationery like that in 25 years, and there it was. So I'm really grateful that he shared Phyllis's letter with me with permission to share it with you. And so I'm just going to read two little paragraphs from her letter. It's a beautiful letter. And I think you'll hear, even though I never met her, and I assume most of you never met her, you'll hear in her own words what was important to her. The unusual thing about this story is she wrote the letter, she put it in the drawer of her desk in her legal office, but she didn't tell her husband or her children, and they found the letter after she had died. So here's what she wrote. We have a poster in our house that says, "Justice, justice shall thou pursue." I have tried to do that with my law practice. Even when we had no money, I tried to take on pro bono work through the Houston Volunteer Lawyers. I believe in volunteer work and in belonging to and supporting organizations that further good causes. Even if you're not an active participant and you only pay dues, your name and number provides support. Join with those who pursue justice and righteousness. Remember, some of your most important accomplishments will not be the ones you're paid to do. Finally, never finish your education. Always try to learn something new. In the last few years, I have taken up tennis lessons, Yiddish, adult education, book club, and I've been trying to read Torah and my Talmud. It refreshes your spirit and rejuvenates your soul to always be confronting and learning new material. Keep studying something, and you will always be an interesting and exciting person. So I'm very grateful to Dave Finger for sharing that with me. And later this year, L'Chaim, the Jewish Letters Project, will be publishing the a fuller excerpt of Phyllis's letter, as well as interview I conducted with her two adult children, who you can see in the photo there, Jennifer and Michael, because we often think about the letter writer, but we don't often think about, well, what was the impact of the letter on the recipient? And I notice there are a lot of people here who work in the grieving world. So how did the letter affect the grieving process for the people who actually have received such a letter? So I wanted to share another example of a letter that chooses Jewish text. And you'll hear in each of these examples, like Phyllis Finger talks about what tzedek tzedek tirdof actually means to her in her own words. In this case, we have a letter from Ben Zussman. He was a 22-year-old kid, a ping pong fan, a soldier in Israel who was killed during the recent war. And he chose a phrase from Isaiah: Jerusalem, I have placed guards that one day will come, and I will be one of them. And you can see in the Hebrew here, it's shomrim kol hayom v'kol halayla. So protection during the day and the night. And what you're going to hear next is, this is an unusual situation, but you're going to hear his letter. So you're going to hear Ben's words, but they're going to be read by his mother, his father, and his grandmother.
Can I ask you to read this letter from your son?
I'm writing this letter to you as I'm heading to the base.
If you are reading it, something must have happened to me. You know me. No one could be happier than me right now.
It was no coincidence that I was on the verge of fulfilling my dream. I'm happy and grateful for the privilege of defending our beautiful land and the people of Israel.
In case something happens to me, I forbid you from sulking in sorrow. I've had the privilege of fulfilling my dream and destiny, and you can be certain that I am looking down on you with a huge smile.
I probably sit next to Grandpa and catch up on what we've missed. Each of us will share our experiences and what changed between the wars. Maybe we'll also talk a little politics, and I'll ask him what he thinks. If God forbid you are sitting Shiva, transform it into a week of friendships, family, and fun.
There should be good food, meat of course, beer, soft drinks, nuts, and of course Mom's cookies. Tell jokes, share stories. You'll get to meet all the rest of my friends that you haven't met yet. You know what? I envy you.
I would want to sit there and see everyone. Another matter that is very, very important.
If God forbid I fall into captivity, dead or alive, I will not allow a single soldier or citizen to be harmed because of some bargaining made for my release. I forbid you to conduct a campaign or struggle or anything of the sort. I am not willing to have terrorists released for me.
In no way, shape, or form.
Don't misconstrue my words, please.
I'll say it again.
I left the house without even being called up to reserve duty.
I am filled with pride and a sense of purpose, and I always said that if I have to die,
I wish it would be in defense of others. In Jerusalem, I have placed guards that one day will come,
and I will be one of them. Shivering. A 22-year-old boy.
Such a cute boy.
and he's definitely a guardian angel over us right now.
So we were talking about the effect of the letter on the recipient. You can see obviously the impact of the letter on the mother, the father, and the grandmother. And the next example, Rabbi Elena Zaman is an American rabbi and a writer. She's the author of a book called The Forever Letter. And she's unusual because as a kid, her dad worked as a rabbi, and she had the experience of being a recipient of a letter and then becoming a rabbi and becoming really interested in the tradition. If you're interested in her book, it's called The Forever Letter, and it's a bit of a riff on a wisdom letter. It's not exactly the same thing, but I'm going to let Rabbi Zaman speak for herself. In the next video, she tells a little bit about the story about what brought her to this in the first place.
What moved you to write the book? Were there personal or professional experiences that contributed to that decision?
Indeed, there was. When I was about 14, my father wrote, at that time it was called an ethical will, to his children, and he wrote it as part of an adult education class, and everybody in the class was writing letters to their children. And he came home from synagogue one day and he handed me this booklet that said ethical wills on the front, and I had no idea what they were. So I look at this booklet and he goes, "One of these is mine, guess which one?" And I went to the den and I started looking through this booklet and putting asterisks next to all of these different letters. And I, came back with like 4 asterisks. Okay, Dad, one of these, it's one of these. And I hadn't read through them because I didn't care about anyone else's letter. I wanted to see what it was that my dad had written. And so he looks at this, he said, it's this one. You did that rather quickly. And I'm like, okay. And then I remember going back into the den and reading that letter. And I read it over and over again. And I just cried. I cried and I cried. And why? Because my dad was this, very well-respected rabbi. And there was this sense around him, at least in those days and ages, it was a sense that here was this being who was close to perfect. At least that's how I was seeing him as a teenager, but that's how the community in my eyes seemed to, they would always come up, your father's this, your father's great, your father's amazing, and I'm just like, wow, okay. And in this letter, he shared some of his weaknesses. And I was like, wow, my dad knows he's human. He knows he's human. And that to me was just amazing. And how he spoke about each and every one of us in this rather shortish letter to communicate who he was. And I probably could tell you sort of who he was without him putting his words on the page. And yet at the same time, I probably wouldn't say it in the same way he did. And it was very profound. And because he hates the phone, I have taken this letter with me and read it and reread it over the years. And when I feel yucky, I pull it out and I read it again. And I hear his voice and I feel his presence.
I think Rabbi Zaman summed it up. I hear his voice and I feel his presence of the person who took time. Now, just a bit of a reality check here with our next slide, and that is what happens when someone dies and there is no wisdom letter. This is most often, I think, the case. And Rabbi David Ingber has a very refreshing take on regret as a gift. So we're going to hear from him.
Such a powerful thing to talk about regret and the importance of regret for a spiritual and, I think, deeply meaningful human life. The sense that our actions and our reactions matter. What matters is how we are in moments to moments, and to think about the importance and the gravity of each moment and how we live it, and the potential for regret, for having lived it the wrong way, makes thinking about our lives a very intense thing, a very beautiful thing, but also something that we might not want to think about. Thinking about regret or thinking about what we might have done differently or what we did right and how we would want that to continue is part of what it is to be a human being, to be a Jewish human being, I think, day to day. In fact, the rabbis say that a person should think about their lives and review it every single day, because really one should think about it the day before they die. And the rabbis said, well, does anybody know the day before they die? And said, no, they don't. So then every day is the day before you die. And so think about your life and think about the things you did right and wrong every single day. But we don't all do that. And certainly when it comes to thinking about our lives and the scope of our life, the task is even bigger. But for that reason, it's that much more important. Not being able to think back on what we did right and wrong and how we lived our lives in relationship with others would be a huge miss. Something that, ironically, we would regret. To live with a life with review and to do a life review is to live our lives with fewer regrets potentially. And in the general scheme, it's really part of what it means in Judaism to give a legacy. The greatest legacy that we can leave our children, the greatest legacy we can leave those around us, is to tell them who we were to them and who they were to us, to leave our lives with them with all of our unfinished business finished, to tie up loose ends and to finish the work. And when it doesn't happen, it can be very, very painful to watch. I know that I'm kind of in it now because my uncle, my father's younger brother, my Uncle Joey, or as I called him, Yasala, we all called him Yasala. My Uncle Joey was Nifter. My Uncle Joey passed away 2 Mondays ago after a 6-month battle with cancer. He was 80, he just turned 80 in March. He lived a very robust, a very full, a very beautiful life. He was a singer, he was a Renaissance man, he had many different careers, he was a lawyer, he was a photographer, he was a beach bum, he was my uncle. And the thing I remember about my uncle more than anything was his voice. He was a singer, he was a cantor, but when the cancer attacked his mouth, we knew that the last part of his life would be lived without access to the very thing that defined him, which was his voice. And so there were many moments of those last 6 months where I thought, I wonder if Joe finished his life review. If Laura and Abby, his 2 daughters, my father, his brother, if others knew the things that were on his heart that during the normal course of everyday life he had thought, there'll be time to say that, there'll be time to finish that, there'll be time to review that, there'll be time, but he didn't have it. A full 80 years, and the last 6 months, even things that he saw coming were lost because I think he hadn't done his life review in a verbal way. And as I sat Shiva with my father, sitting and watching him, I thought, I wonder what Joe would say now if he knew what my father needed to hear to be complete. A person should review their life a day before their death. But since we don't know when we're going to die, today's the day. It isn't easy to review your life. It isn't easy to bring everything up that is unfinished, but we can do it. There are so many ways for us to make these moments matter, because that's what matters the most, is to not have unfinished business before we go. So tough questions and difficult things to do, but writing letters, making phone calls, that's all the work that we have at our disposal to make what matters really matter the most.
Thank you, Rabbi Ingber. We're going to go to the last letter before we get into the writing prompts. This is an anonymous letter from an American woman, and I chose it because it describes something that may happen to you tonight, which is that sometimes in the writing itself, you're surprised at what you discover. She writes, in preparing to write this, I made a timeline of important events in my life and thought about questions that were meant to help me articulate and describe a legacy. You can imagine how surprised I was to find my answers were pretty ordinary. Marrying John, becoming Anna's mother, and Lily's grandmother. Here I am, someone who believes in social change, highlighting social conventions. So you may find when you start doing the prompts that you discover things about yourself that you didn't know. And that's actually one of the beautiful things about the writing prompt exercise. And we're going to jump in, but before we do, I just want to take a quick pause for any questions that may have arisen. And I want to say I'm delighted. I did a brief view of the chat, and I see there are people here on the Zoom who have received ethical wills from their family members. Lucky you. If you would consider sharing them with L'Chaim, the Jewish Letters Project, we would be delighted to read them. The submission it's not a guarantee of publication, but I promise that I will read any letter that is sent to me.
Thanks, Lesley. The first question that comes in is one we hear often in our programs. What if I'm a solo ager? Oftentimes, we have people who don't have children or younger family members. Who am I writing this letter for?
Thank you for the question. It's an excellent question. And I think that we have our families of origin, and then we also have our chosen families. So if you're a solo ager, you would be writing for people in your community, what I would call your chosen family, your friends, people who you consider family. It doesn't have to be a letter for children, but the people who are close to you, who are part of your life, with whom you want to share some of the wisdom of your own experience. It's a great question. Thank you for it.
Lesley, here's another question for you. Any tips for translating these wisdom letters into obituaries? I've been curious about ways that the dying can have more agency in how they're remembered.
So that's interesting. There are people who would write a letter after receiving a terminal diagnosis. And when you think about, for example, a newspaper obituary is usually written in the third person, right? Someone dies, and then the journalist, I've been in this position myself, you interview family members and friends, and you try to create an accurate portrait of that person's life. But you're relying on other people. So you could write this yourself, in which case it's coming from you. And some of these may appear obituary like only in the sense that people sometimes share a credo of their life and of what they believe and what really mattered. Just before we came online today, I was talking about a letter that came to my attention from Edmund Rothschild. He was of the French banking family. He went to what was in Palestine in 1925, and he delivered a speech that was considered like his credo, and it was put into the collection I told you about at the beginning as an ethical will, so that it's included in, so that your values live on. And the reason why it caught my eye is I'm a really creative person. And so I love, when people take something old and transform it into something new. Like you take a ladder and you turn it into a bookshelf, or you take a sock and you turn it into a puppet, or a t-shirt and you turn it into a bag. So when Rothschild was in Israel, he, I'll just read you this one tiny bit. When I call to memory the past, about 50 years ago when I first began my work, when I recall the appearance of the land strewn with stones, full of thorn and thistle, its inhabitants struggling to produce meager kernels from the poor soil, it is as though I were in a dream. It never occurred to me that all Jews would be gathered in Eretz Israel. Today, this remains an impossibility. What was in my heart was the establishment of a center, one that is as significant as possible for the enhancement of the spirit of Judaism and its exalted Torah. And then he goes on to say, people make fun of him and they say to him, "You're building on sand." Quote, "You're building on sand. Now here is the sand. And in the word of the psalmist, it has become a cornerstone in the rebuilding of Israel. The fields are cultivated, the numerous vineyards and orchards are like oases in the desert." So this reference to a cornerstone is an allusion to Rosh Pinah, which was one of the early settlements that Rothschild maintained. And it's a reference to Psalms, which there's a line that says, "The stone which the builder rejected is become the chief cornerstone." So that's a fascinating idea, right? Something that is rejected becomes transformed. So when you ask about wisdom letters being translated into obituaries, you could write something like that, and it may be more of kind of your credo for living and something that you want people to know. I think we should probably pop into the writing
Yeah,
prompt.
just one quick question on semantics. The difference between forever letters and ethical wills again? Is
Right.
there a
So
difference?
no, there is a difference. The forever letter moves in all directions. And if you go to my Substack, you'll see a post where Alana Zaman defines it in a lot of detail. But a forever letter could be a love letter of forgiveness. It could be a letter that is really designed to deepen relationship between friends. It's not necessarily concerned about legacy. So she kind of riffs on the theme, and it's more centered on healing and connection. A forever letter could be like a wisdom letter, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And her book is very accessible. It's available at lots of public libraries. It includes some writing exercises. So if you enjoy the prompts, then by all means enrich your repertoire and go for more. I think we can we move to the prompts now? Okay, so you guys should all have something to write with. I want to tell you that this is not for school. Nobody's marking you. It's for your eyes only. You don't have to share. You can return to what you wrote to revise. In fact, I encourage that because this is going to be like very fast cross training. This is just a tiny appetizer of what writing prompts feel like. And we're going to get going. I'm going to time this, and I'm promising you, you're not going to have a lot of time. So one of the ideas here is to put your pen on the page or computer or whatever you've got for writing. And I want you to write very quickly. Don't edit yourself. I'm going to time you. And when the time is up, I'm just going to ask Samantha to take us to the next slide. So on your marks, get set. We're going to start with list your wishes, big and small. List your wishes, big and small. We're going to go to the next one. What got you through your biggest challenge? What got you through your biggest challenge? We're going to go to the next one. What do you regret? What do you regret? We're going to go to the next one. Describe a time you led with your heart. Describe a time you led with your heart. The next one is for people who are more visual. Doodle a heart, doodle more, and see what emerges. Doodle a heart, doodle more, and see what emerges. Okay, we're going to go to the next one. It's, have you ever cut someone out of your life? Have you ever cut someone out of your life? I thought this was an unusual question, and I read it. If anyone wants to do more reading, a great book by the American rabbi Steve Leader, For You When I'm Gone. And it's 12 essential questions to tell a life story. And that struck me as an interesting one that I didn't expect, so I included it here. We're going to go to the next one. I forgot to tell you. I forgot to tell you. with the next one. How has being Jewish affected your life? How has being Jewish affected your life? We're going to go to the next one. What has brought you joy? What has brought you joy? Okay, and we're going to go to the final prompt. What will be your final blessing? What will be your final blessing? Thank you for doing the prompts with me. I often redo them myself because my answers change sometimes depending on the time. These prompts are my gift to you. You can return to them. You can make up your own. They're basically designed, I think of an artist has a palette of paint. And in order to make that painting, you need some raw material. So these prompts are really your raw material, and it's completely up to you what you want to do with them. I noticed there are a lot of people in the chat who are working with people who are dealing with loss and grief. And I think you can see, for example, with Rabbi Elena Zaman, her father is no longer alive, but she has the letter. It's something concrete that she can hear his voice and feel his presence. And I guess the thing I want to stress, and the thing that kind of made me fall in love with these letters in the first place was we've all had an experience of going to funerals. And I suspect everybody in the Zoom has heard many eulogies, good and bad, accurate and inaccurate. Even a eulogy that is perfectly accurate and beautifully written, it's still about someone. It's very different than hearing from the voice of the person themselves in their own words. And that to me is the power and the beauty of this extraordinary tradition. It's not well known in the diaspora. And if this is your introduction to it, first of all, thank you for coming. I'm delighted to see you. And if you're curious, you just click on the link at Jewish Letters Project at substack.com, and you'll have access to my full archive. I must tell you that my little project is turning 1 year old in October, so I think I'm going to make myself a little cake to celebrate this milestone. And I'm still looking for more letters. So if, like Dave Finger, you're feeling generous and you'd like to send me some, there seem to be a lot of people in the Zoom tonight who are in a very fortunate position to have received letters from family members. I would absolutely love to read them. I promise to read every submission I get. It's not a promise for publishing, but I'm definitely interested in reading them. And before we say goodnight, I'd love to answer any other questions that you have that may have come up.
Lesley, we had someone reflect a bit in the chat about how our answers to your questions, to the writing prompts, might be different if we had a different intended reader in mind, right? The letter that I might write to my children might be different than a letter I might write to my friends, for example.
This is very true, and it's a really good point. There are people, for example, like Sharon Strassfeld, who started writing a letter to her daughter. Then she had more than one child, so she wrote more letters and it turned into a book. And so, because she says in the book, because her children were different, she had a son named Noam, he was a different personality than the daughter Kayla, she wrote a different letter to him. That is one way to do it, for sure. There's a woman I know who wrote many, many letters to all the people in her lives based on her relationship. She's a grandmother, so she wrote to grandchildren and she wrote to friends, and she was someone who loved to write. And so she was kind of a letter factory. However, that might not be for everybody. So if you think about the people who you love, and it includes the solo ager, okay? So it includes the people who we consider our chosen family. It's not just biological children. And for that matter, it's not just biological family. It's people with whom we have a close relationship and with whom we want to share what we have learned from our sojourn on the planet. What is the essence of our experience for really creating a purpose-filled life? It's an excellent question. Someone has written here, I'd write a different letter to my grandchildren and daughter. Absolutely. I have a letter in the archive of an American grandfather who wrote a letter to his granddaughter. Here's a different rite of passage. On the occasion of her graduation from high school. Okay, so this girl who graduated from high school is now a woman in her mid-80s. And she came to a class I was teaching at Holy Blossom in Toronto with a letter in her purse. And she said to me, my grandfather wrote this letter for me, and he died 2 years later. She was the only grandchild to have received the letter. It was an extraordinary letter. And she said, the money's long gone because he had given her some money when she also graduated from her high school, but she held on to the letter. Grandparents absolutely can write to grandchildren, and it makes complete sense that you would write something different.
Note of gratitude to you in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay. And the last thing I want to do for Shomer Collective is to remind you that we are here thanks to the generosity of our donors. So if you have it in your ability to support our work, we really appreciate your help. And I also want to put in a plug again for Lesley's work. Lesley completed a PhD dissertation on this and is probably the repository of contemporary North American Jewish ethical wills and writings of this sort. And so if you have one in your family, in your life, that you want to share as part of her work as a researcher and as a writer, please share it with her. Just words of gratitude. Thank you all for being here with us. Wishing you all good health as we head into the new year. And Lesley, thank you for being our teacher and our friend.
Total pleasure, total honor, and Shana Tova Umetika for everybody. I call this my little flashlight during a dark time. So
Nice.
let's keep shining some light.
Amen.
Thank you.